You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is Thursday, June 12th, 2025 at 7:36 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And I thought that what we would talk about is navigating conflict and managing difficult people from the attachment perspective. Really, what we're talking about then is what was the conflict resolution strategy in your family system that you witnessed and then over the course of your childhood developed as a way of managing conflict? And how much of it have you investigated or even and then moderated depending on how successful a strategy it is? What we really do is learn by observing our caregivers resolve conflicts between them and between the adults and the extended family, how conflicts are resolved. So that if you witnessed it in my family, what would happen is there would be some conflict. There would be an expression of, we'll get back to you. My mother and father would hash it out behind closed doors. And then my mother would tell us what my father's decision was. There was never an opportunity to have any input. We weren't really given the option to disagree with whatever the outcome was. If we did disagree, which we began to do later in childhood, then the response was always, do what you want. We're just not going to support it. And so they would withdraw all financial support from whatever it is that we wanted to do. And we could do it on our own without that if we could manage it. We needed to be really careful about the points of view we expressed because they could enrage my dad easily and he would then be punitive in his decision making. So I think that that's essentially the conflict resolution strategy that the overall family system required, particularly if it meant an expenditure of resources, which were all under my father's control. My mother would sometimes try to mitigate his decisions, but it always had to be done under the cloak of secrecy, and only if she had the resources if she had the resources available. And my dad was very controlling about that as well. So it was often she didn't. Which I think for most of us in our family system led to a real inhibition in expressing authentically what we needed. A real inhibition in understanding the care that we would like to have received or receive, and so a sense of deprivation, quite a bit, a sense of hardship. When you come out of childhood, you have the conflict resolution system that you've learned, and when you begin to negotiate relationships outside the family system. And this is really what's going to be happening at puberty or so. In childhood, we have the early attachment conditioning, which usually concludes around age 3, and then we move into the mid-childhood period. And a lot of these ways of being in the family are fully negotiated by the time that happens. And so we come into the self-experience, that witnessing to who we are and what we do, with most of these negotiations with how we're going to be and how we're going to relate to the family system already concluded. So in some sense, we come into that autobiographical memory, that capacity for self-reference, with all of that already concluded. Only if the deals are really bad for that does it carry on into that mid-childhood period. And if the chaos of the family system is really bad, then deals aren't reached, and it's a kind of chaotic environment. But the conflict resolution strategy is still being witnessed, still being internalized. When adolescence hits, the brain goes under this radical transformation. The child's brain is this warren of unconnected axons which just sop up information. This amazing capacity of a child's brain just to take in information, make associations, but very slow cognitively. In order to boost the cognitive, when you hit puberty, the brain, everything that's not connected in the brain is ruthlessly pruned back to the barest scaffolding of what is already connected. So that speed and that ease of learning in childhood goes away with that structural change in the brain. But your cognitive mind is boosted dramatically so that you can begin for the first time to examine the deals that you made in your childhood about how you were going to participate in the family system. Admittedly, you don't have a lot of power in this kind of dynamic. And so what we're really hoping for is that we'll have caregivers that are sensitively attuned to us, who are interested in our welfare and our well-being, or interested in promoting for us access to the things that will allow us to thrive in the development of our innate talents and our skill sets that we'll learn to explore. There's a lot of emphasis in our culture on being creative, particularly if you move up the class ladder, where there's resources beyond survival. And often it's thought that some people are creative and some people are not creative. But I would just swap out that word a little bit to use the word play. Some people can play well and some people can't play well, but you can learn to play. It isn't something that's innate. Your capacities for dexterities, your capacities for solving problems. And there's a lot of different kinds of intelligence, vary quite a bit. But that freedom to explore, that freedom to play is a skill that's developed and instructed. And if you don't have that instruction, that skills training as a child, it doesn't mean that you're inherently incapable of it. It just means that you haven't learned how to do it yet. Now, it is true that if you have caregivers that are sensitively attuned to you, who explore what matters to you, what has meaning to you, and you're encouraged and supported all the way along, you have a huge jump start on people who haven't been able to do that yet. But it doesn't mean that you can't. I just want that to be clear. We can learn to play, and we can learn to play in a way that enlivens our capacity to explore this human condition, which is the thing that we're all really doing here. Most of the time, we have to be able to engage in relationships where we can exchange our understanding of the things that we're exploring. This is one of the fundamental aspects of good explorers. They're able to exchange the experience of exploration with each other and glean from those navigations strategies that will be useful in their own exploration. But then in offering to the other people or other persons the experience of your own exploration, they then can glean from you strategies that might be useful in their exploration. So there's a real synergy that can happen between people exchanging the experiences of exploration that they have. In order for you to get people to be interested in that exchange, you have to be exploring, and you have to be exploring at a level close to how they're exploring, or you won't have the insights that matter for them to put the energy into the exchange. And so what ends up happening if you don't explore well, if you haven't developed those skills, you're limited to who is actually going to engage you. But it also means that if you can find other people who are at the beginning of learning the skills of play, of exploration, they're actually the peer group that will matter the most for you. You don't have to go with the experts. You don't have to feel denied if they're not so open at the beginning of your discovery. Go with the people who are also discovering, because that's where you'll find the skill set that is going to be the most useful to you in developing these capacities. In order for you to maintain those relationships over a period of time, you have to be able to work through conflicts that might arise in the relationships. And this is where we are. This is the topic of the evening. How do you learn to navigate conflict in a relationship? And what this suggests is that you have a good idea of what your conflict resolution strategy is. And you have somebody who's willing to actually express to you what their conflict resolution strategy is, so that you can begin to understand how they'll mesh, how they'll interact in a way that's useful. In secure functioning relationships where the collaborative relationship model is the language of the relationship, there is also a confidence that putting a creative mind on a problem or a conflict between two people will result in a solution that works for both people. It's only when you come up with a solid win-win that you're able to navigate the conflict into resolution. All of us are sensitive to abandonment. And if you're in a conflict with in a relationship that matters to you, if there's a threat of abandonment by one party, everybody capitulates. It's not surprising that we're undone by our fear of being left alone, of having to do it alone. But the problem with that is that over time, you will not be able to sustain an agreement with somebody if you feel like you're losing out or it's unfair. We're very moral creatures, and we really do pay attention to that. And so then the conflict arises again. So what I'm really trying to express here is that it isn't the conflicts that push the relationships over, that destroy the relationships. It's the loss of hope that you'll be able to successfully negotiate a conclusion to the conflict. And this hope is lost through the process of accepting unfair agreements and then insisting that they be kept. So if you're on the winning side of that, your insistence that the other party made a deal with you and that they're reneging on it is the thing that pushes it over. And if you've been, in some sense, bullied into accepting an unfair agreement and you find that you can no longer do it, you also are complicit in the agreement that was unsustainable. If you're the one who successfully bullies people, then you're going to have to back off because you'll destroy all of your relationships in doing that. And if you accept inauthentically an agreement because you're too afraid to be abandoned, you are also complicit in destroying the relationship. You need to come to a place of confidence that you can work out whatever the conflict is, creatively solve it in a collaborative effort with the other person, and only accept a settlement that is a solid win-win for both parties, because anything short of that, at a certain point, one person is going to bail on the agreement. And if that happens enough, uh, there's a loss of hope that the conflict can be resolved and the relationship collapses. Makes sense? Would it?
It not sure, because theoretically it does, of course, but I mean, I was listening to my mom and dad arguing, but there is the merging is of opposites. Like there is no possible. If somebody wants a car and other person does not want a car, like there's just black and white options. There is no like middle answer.
What did they do?
Well, my mom's, for example, is wants my dad to buy a new car, and my dad does not want to buy a car. So there's a
So is it just left open?
yeah.
So then the negotiation is ongoing rather than failed.
Well, failed because they both they know that it's going to lead to argument, and it doesn't reach any conclusion ever.
Right.
It will never reach any conclusion because you can't. It's almost like you either pick something up or you don't. You cannot half pick something up.
Well, you could say, I don't want to buy a car now, but I'll buy a car in 2 years.
But that's not agreeable, right, for the other person.
Well, it might or might not be. Or you could say, if we hit these financial markers, then I'm willing to buy a car. And if we don't hit these financial markers, I'm not willing to buy a car. And that could be agreeable. What is the reason behind it? So it doesn't have to be the car, right? I don't want to buy a car now, but what else can I do to you that will give you the same feeling that having a new car would give you? If that's what you're really after. And it isn't actually the car, it's the gesture of expression of affection or status or something that you want. What is it that the car represents? And could I replace that with something other than a car?
What could that be possibly? A car is a pretty big. I mean, replacing a car.
Let's go on a trip for 3 months. Let's redo the furniture. Let's whatever it is. Whatever it is that would be as satisfying as a new car would be, understanding what the purpose of the car was. What does the car mean beyond a car? What is it what do they really want? And if you could discern what they really wanted, and it didn't matter whether the expression was a car or not, then it could be something else. That's what I mean by the creative solution.
So status, how would you replace status of a car?
Well, lots of things have status. You find one that was as satisfying or more satisfying, but then also met the reasons why your dad didn't want to buy a car, which we don't know. Why wouldn't he want to buy a new car? What does that mean to him? And so how can both of those ultimate desires be satisfied in a creative solution that isn't necessarily a car? Would be one way to go.
Okay.
What is it that you really want? What is it you're really asking for? And how can that be satisfied in a way that also matches what I really want, what I'm really hoping for? That's the creative solution. And you leave it open and you try things on. Maybe this will work, maybe that will work. So you try it. Does it work? If it doesn't work, there's no penalty because you haven't closed the collaborative solution hunting. And some problems are complex and take a few months or so to resolve. And also, things don't always last. In fact, Nietzsche, nothing lasts really. I know we had this agreement, but it's not sitting well, and I need to renegotiate it. And in a collaborative situation, the other person would go, okay, let's open it up and see how we might make it work. And I appreciate that you're saying that you did make the agreement and now you want to change it, so there isn't that kind of distortion of experience. In insecure relationships, one person is used to being taken care of, and one person is used to making all of those decisions, and the other person is used to adapting to them. One of the difficulties in moving from that kind of relational agreement to one that's collaborative is usually the person who is being taken care of is satisfied with the relationship, and usually the person who is doing the caregiving is unsatisfied with the relationship. So that the person who is satisfied doesn't see a great compelling need to change the terms of the relationship. Whereas the person whose needs have not been met is finding it difficult to continue with the relationship the way that it is. So often what you have there is a back and forth, there's an acquiescence, there's a temporary inclusion of more care, but as soon as it feels like it's back to normal, that drops away and it goes back to the original terms of the relationship. We would call that transactional, a transactional relationship. In a disorganized relationship, it's more trauma bonded. And so you come in and out of being in relationship to the person that you're in relationship to, in and out with the avatar of your perpetrator. Most disorganized, attached people fall on the other side of the trauma line. So there's some trauma element in the experience of childhood that is then repeated in the adult relationships. And this is really also a reflection of the conflict strategies that we use. So the main way that we talk about working with this is to begin to examine the conflict resolution themes or strategies that you employ. And we think about them as a reflection of the family system. So we're also interested in understanding what conflict resolution strategy did you develop with your father or father figures? What conflict resolution strategies did you develop with your mother or mother figures? And how do those conflict resolution strategies then appear in your significant relationships? So we're, in some sense, creating an inventory or a map of the patterns of conflict resolution that you use, and also how it tends to manifest. So we begin to look at significant relationships throughout your life. When did you first recognize that you had a significant involvement with somebody outside of the immediate family system? And then which were the relationships in your family system that were significant, that you required negotiating conflict? Some families, particularly with adverse circumstances, tend to the kids tend to form a bond, a real unit that helps them engage with the family system, the caregiver system. But often, what also happens is that the kids don't form a relationship with each other. They cohabitate, but they don't really have much in the way of authentic exchange with each other. There's usually some interference with that happening from the caregiver if they're sensitive to it. So you may not have significant relationships in the family outside of the caregivers. Maybe you had grandparents that were close enough and involved enough that they had a parental feel to them in the way that you formed relationship to them. So that would be an interesting examination of the conflict resolution piece there. Also, understanding that they're the instructors of your parents in terms of, or your caregivers in terms of their conflict resolution strategies. You might get a different take on the system that your caregivers are using. And then we begin that inventory of significant friendships. And sometimes in adolescence, people begin romantic relationships, and what those significant partnerings were analyzing the conflict resolution themes that move through them. And what you may begin to notice is that you use consistently the same strategy, but you also identify people that have a similar strategy, or one that works with your attachment strategy, even if it prevents intimacy in the relationship. That's one of the aspects of it, because what becomes apparent is your conflict resolutions, the strategy, but what also can become apparent is the conflict resolution strategy that's required of the people that you form relationships to. It's more varied in secure people because they're much more flexible. In insecure and disorganized people, it tends to get progressively more rigid in terms of what that looks like, so that you can begin to recognize this is the attachment strategies I use, and this is the conflict resolution strategy that sort of sits on top of that attachment conditioning. That is how I attempt to resolve difficulties that come up in the relationship. The least adaptable, the least flexible, the more relationships you tend to have, the shorter they tend to be, or the on-off quality that can happen quite a bit. You begin to recognize the pattern of the other person. And then we begin to engage in an ideal parent figure protocol process of coming into the mind states of these conflict resolution themes, and then tracing them back in the early part of the work to the early conditioning, and in some sense remodeling that, but then also engaging in secure intimacy visualization, where you can adapt a much more flexible, much more open, much more collaborative strategy for being in conflict. And I really do want to emphasize this. It is not the conflict in the relationship that causes them to come apart. It's the loss of hope that you'll ever successfully be able to negotiate a solution that actually works for you, that causes the relationship to fail. Once you've lost hope that can happen, it's very difficult to continue on with the relationship. And when you begin to see that these things repeat and you can unwind them, that also can overcome the loss of hope that sometimes shows up in people in their sort of middle 30s, They've tried a bunch of different relationships. None of them have really worked. None of them have, and they've not been able to successfully resolve the conflicts. It's a little confusing why that doesn't happen. But that disappointment in relationships not working accumulates. And at a certain point, it's just not worth having to dive back into that disappointment that you can't make relationships work. And so you begin to withdraw from the interest in pursuing them. So, sort of in the mid 30s, that happens to a lot of people. Disorganized people in particular, that happens to quite a bit. That confusion and disappointment, that loss of hope that you'll be able to figure it out. And so that energy that you used to explore relationships then is funneled into other things. And depending on how successful you are at funneling the energy into other things, once you figure out that you can have an engaged life where you can find enough meaning, then it gets very difficult to make the level of compromises that are necessary to move into those kinds of committed partnerships. Make sense? Now, what I also thought that I would talk about is difficult people. We often encounter them, not necessarily in our intimate relationships, but often in the environment. People that are involved with people that we are close to, or in our work lives, people that there's just this inability to navigate conflict resolution systems, or the meanings of the way that they operate in your system are problematic, and they cause in you a reaction. We want to get to a place where we can open up to difficult people and not have to get away from them. That's really that first level of just aversion. We just want to get away from them. In the loving kindness practice, in the compassion practice, in the sympathetic joy practice, in the equanimity practice, one of the categories that we work with is difficult people. And it happens at a lot of different levels. You often hear me talk about co-regulation and the automatic aspect of that. Some people are regulating for you. Some people are neutral, not much happens. Some people are dysregulating in that interaction of nervous systems, let's say. Not much you can do about that if that's the level that it's operating in. But very often it's the levels after that. It's the views or the points of view of the world, of politics, of how relationships are supposed to operate. It's about power often. Who has it? Who doesn't? What are those reflections of those acknowledgments? What are those like? So we open to that usually in starting the heart practices. We start with loving kindness practice, and we start with an easy person. Easy person is a category that Indika Sayadaw, the Mirama teacher that we have sat with quite a bit, uses as a metaphor for the teacher, benefactor, mentor category. He says that in teaching Western students, we hold teachers, mentors, and benefactors with such little regard that they're not useful in the practice of loving kindness. And so he uses instead the term easy, the person who, when you think of them, the mind naturally inclines toward the mindset of love and kindness. We then cause the mind state to arise, hold it, place our attention on it. The next category is yourself. Can you hold that mindset of love and kindness with yourself, or is the working model of yourself so lopsided on the negative side that you can't manage to hold yourself with positive regard? If that's the case, then the whole beginning of the practice should be oriented to working toward yourself, rebalancing as a largely positive experience, an experience that you enjoy having, so that when the sense of self arises, it's an enjoyable experience. Dan Brown used to say that the root cause of self-hatred is aversion to the self-experience when it arises. Something triggers it, it arises, it's largely made up of negative gists or negative experiences, and we're filled in recognizing the experience of ourselves with negativity. And at a certain point, we begin to be averse to the experience of that happening, and it happens over and over and over again. And so that's that root cause. We just don't want it anymore. We don't want our self experiences. We don't like the negativity. It creates that relationship of self hatred. But if you can rebalance it so that the experience of self as it arises, is a pleasant experience that you enjoy having. The root cause of self-love is that each time the sense of self arises, you love having it. Mudit?
George, are you talking? I was thinking about this, and is it the sense of self? It has to be in relation with another. Um, so when you say that the emotion that you feel about yourself is largely positive in relationship with others, why, when we're doing metta for self, the instruction should have included people in the same visualization, but
Well, why do you think it needs to be always in interacting with others?
because it feels like there is no self if there is no other. That there is a sense that I think
Well,
the
we
image
don't have a good, go ahead.
the image that I have about myself as a negative person is only when there's another person, right? The
No,
sense of
you could easily have it on your own. One of the reasons that we isolate and limit contact with other people is uh, for what you're talking about, really, is that the sense of self needn't arise if we're on our own. And so we reduce the stimulation that causes the negative self arising. And that's part of it. But something could still happen that would cause that to arise. And often it is with other people. But also, other people are capable of reflecting back to us their experience of us. If you grow up and you have a largely negative self experience, it's because very early on, the caregiver that was responsible for reflecting back to you uh, a, a suggestion or representation of yourself instead reflected back to you their difficulty in being with you. And we take in that difficulty as who we are because we weren't actually adequately, they didn't adequately express who we are to us early on. And so we really developed this working model of self that's based on their difficulty in providing the care that we needed rather than a representation of who we were and what our capacities were. And so we become very sensitive. But in that whole process of creating reality in the moment, the capacity to sense meets the object that can be sensed, consciousness of that sensing experience arises. It's evaluated for urgency. Does it need immediate attention? Does it not matter if we ever get to it? Is there time for a pleasant experience? a queue of mind moments is formed, the negative always jumping to the top of the queue. So it's very easy if we get on a negative jag, never to allow the positive experience, which is also there, to come into consciousness. And then it's compared to the perceptual database. If there's an entry that's close enough to that mind moment, then the whole thread of meaning attaches to it and it rolls into conceptual reality, which is what the self experience knows, that already completed cycle most of the time. But what is also part of that is the intention for the action that you're going to take in response, the action, if you take it, and the gathering of the outcome of the action that you took. But in that process of forming the intention also is the expectation of what might happen based on the action that you take. And if you have a lot of negative conditioning, those expectations are usually a poor outcome. And so when you structure the action that you're going to take, all of that defensiveness, all of that anticipation of rejection or failure is built into the action that you express and affects the way that it unfolds. You know, it could be very simple. Let's go to the park and play on the swings. You don't want to go to the park, do you? You wouldn't want to play on the swings. Same request, one is colored with the anticipation of acceptance and one is buffering for the rejection. So we need to really begin to understand that the way in which we do that. And that anticipation of what might happen is actually where the conflict resolution themes fit in. How are we going to have to negotiate this desire that we have based on what our conflict resolution strategies tell us is the way to negotiate it?
I realize this rejection in this swing example is not always like a no, but it could be any other comment that
Right.
it's a no rejection. So I was going to say that the negative sense of self was developed in presence of their caregiver. So the positive should also be, because I realize in my experience, it's almost like if somebody does boost me, is way more impactful than me doing metta for myself sometimes.
Right.
Like it's a different self.
So in the metta for self, what we're attempting to do is create the possibility that that could happen. So that when it does happen, you can recognize it.
What could happen?
That somebody could make a positive expression of a delight for you. But if you're not sensitive to delight and you don't think it's a possibility, it won't matter whether they do or not because you won't be able to track it. You won't be able to recognize it. It is actually not a possibility.
Mm.
You won't believe it. If you're disorganized, you'll think that they're manipulating you to harm you, and you'll react appropriately. Preoccupied people have almost no experience of delight. And it's also not valuable in their system. So even if somebody did express it, it wouldn't be valued. There would be no understanding of the utility of it. Right? Dismissing people idealize, they don't delight. So there's always an expectation of a transaction in the experience of delight from coming from someone else because it's misinterpreted as idealization and not delight, which is free in that sense. It's only in collaborative relationships systems where it's a currency. So what we have to do is prime the body mind and these models with these admittedly imaginary experiences of it so that when the actual experience comes, it can be recognized and engaged, and then that's remembered as something that actually happens and not just the visualization of it. But without the sensitivity to it, without generating a meaning that is different than the original conflict system, there isn't that possibility of meaning. Is that making sense? Difficult people, mainly the trouble is, and as we move from self to close people, to friends and family, to neutral people, and finally out to difficult people, there's a lot to manage in understanding why it is that the meaning of that encounter means what it does, and so that you can shift it and then create a space for it. Then we can also begin to talk about and differentiate between the unpleasant experience of somebody and the person who is actually harming. In the person who is actually harming, of course, you need to come into a defensive stance with them so that they cannot harm you, but it doesn't need to be accompanied by anger. It doesn't need to be accompanied by cruelty in order to hold that boundary. You can hold it just as well with kindness, just as well with compassion. In fact, you could probably hold it longer with kindness, longer with compassion than you could with anger or cruelty. So to see that they're conditioned like everyone, responding to their conditioning, cognitively can resolve that anger, but you still have to understand that if somebody is harming, then you need to defend so that you are not harmed by them. What do you say we do a little bit of meditation? Did you want to do, which one do you want to do? Loving kindness, insight, or ideal parent figure?
Metta.
All right. So go ahead and take your meditation posture. All right. Let go of the meditation. Comments, questions?
There was a sense that why should I be peaceful because I have these beliefs, like negative beliefs, or why would I like myself if I'm slightly racist, for example? But then I think I found a better way to say this is, regardless of all the beliefs I have or all the actions, may there be a backdrop of peace.
Right.
That helps me from not getting lost in the feeling of peacefulness.
Good. All of the conditioning we want to begin to examine so that we can be free of it. There's just a ton of it. The racism is so pervasive in our culture, it's next to impossible not to be conditioned in that way.
Mm.
It's often not possible to unwind all of the conditioning, but you can become ardently anti-racist in response to it. I think that actually that's a good place to start. Because, the conditioning is subtle and deep and early, depending on, societal pressures. I grew up in a town in the 50s that intentionally segregated the elementary schools and intentionally integrated the middle and high schools, because the research showed that if children didn't learn in very early to read across race lines, they would be race blind. And then by the time they hit puberty, which was middle and school and adolescence, it would be too late and they wouldn't be able to do it. So that it would reinforce the racial segregation and at the same time allow for there to be a harmony amongst the groups later. So it's not a subtle thing in the way that our society's constructed it. And so we need to recognize our own conditioning and then become involved in unwinding it. So we have coming up on July 21st and July 28th, half-day longs on intermediate and advanced mentalizing is how I like to think of it, but actually we're talking about it in terms of exploration, or I might say, considering what we've talked about tonight, learning how to play so that you can discover the meaning and purpose of your life. And we'll do that in 2 half days on June 21st and June 28th. On July 3rd, on Thursday afternoon at 4:30, we're starting a new level 2 series, which will run for 6 months. If you're interested in joining that, just go ahead and sign up for it. It's open. And then on July 12th, we're starting another level 1 series, which will run for 3 Saturdays. So the 12th, the 19th, and the 26th. And then what do we have? On August 9th, we're starting level 1 meditation and addiction. And that will run for 3 Saturdays, so the 9th, the 16th, and the 23rd. And I think that we're going to start a level 2 meditation and addiction on September 15th. So the meditation and addiction meets 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 6 to 7 p.m. For 12 weeks. So that's what's coming up over the summer. If any of that grabs you, take a look. It's on the website. Happy to have you sign up. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope that if you're in a position to make a donation, you will. There's links to make a donation on the website. Any amount is helpful. It helps support me and also the work Mettagroup is doing. I really appreciate your practice. It's great to see you here, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.